I'm so excited to welcome you to a very special episode of Parenting and You with me, Dr. Shefali. Joining me today is my dear friend, renowned spiritual guru, #1 New York Times bestselling author, Gabby Bernstein. Gabby talks about her latest book, Self-Help, and how self-healing has been her transformative tool to her greatest potential. Coming up, you will hear from Gabby about the 4 key questions she uses to ask herself whenever she feels an emotional crisis and how you too can learn these questions for your own growth. This is going to be such a special episode because joining me now is my dear friend, renowned spiritual guru, New York Times bestselling author of I don't know how many books, Gabby Bernstein. Gabby has a new book coming out. I don't know how she does it. It's called Self-Help. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get into it, especially how self-help can help us as parents. But Gabby, welcome. But just before we get into the book, I know you've been on such a journey as a mother, both pre-conception and, of course, in your growth as a conscious parent. I know you've really embraced the teachings of conscious parenting. So I would love for you to tell us what has been your biggest lesson.
I knew you were going to come in with such a big one right out the gate. You were going to come right in with a big one. My biggest lesson as a parent, my biggest lesson as a parent is to learn how to parent myself first. Because the more I have a inner sense of safety inside, the more safe I can be energetically, the more my son can regulate with my presence, and the greater resource I can be for him.
You know, you've done so much inner work even before you became a parent, but I know that your struggles with postpartum depression kind of took you by surprise. And I think your teachings there can be helpful to other mothers because I think we look at it as a personal failing, as a personal shortcoming. So can you talk about how that was for you and how you got through it?
Well, I've been blessed with with a tsunami of hormonal fluctuations in my life, most recently now with perimenopause. And now this experience with the perimenopause also affects the parenting experience too. I think we have to be able to speak for that for all the mamas out there and for the fathers out there who don't know what's going on. Because when women go through these hormonal changes, whether it be postpartum or menopausal or whatever it might be, it is often kind of like a shakedown. It's like an inner shakedown that I do believe we can move through it and come through with a lot more boundaried, a lot more clear, a lot more aligned spiritually and personally. But when you're in it, it's confusing and it's alarming. And that's been when you have these experiences. Not all women have these experiences. I just happen to have the tsunami of them all. And with regard to the postpartum, I think that period of my life when I had extreme suicidal ideation and very extreme postpartum and anxiety, I would say was the first step for me in really recognizing that I had to, one, be open to a medicated path that was unlike one I had ever known before, and which ultimately saved my life. And also to pay close attention to what my experience was and not override it with just some, oh, it's just this, it's just that. The sort of, I'm just anxious, I'm just busy. When we're having hormonal or biochemical conditions, there's no justing it, right? There's no justifying it. It is a condition that deserves and needs the proper treatment. And I want to be able to speak very proudly and loudly about my recovery from these experiences so that I can help a lot of women that may not have access to these types of resources and help them get as much support and help as they can. And like I said earlier, to the husbands that have no idea what's going on and how much that can be really overwhelming and scary, particularly though for the women because we feel so alone in it.
Yeah, and I think, especially as early mothers, you had this with the birth of your first child. I think we inundate ourselves with so much doing that we neglect ourselves. Just you saying that you experienced suicidal ideation, I just want listeners to appreciate this is a woman who has done a lot of work, but still this can happen
Yeah.
because it's biochemical.
Yeah.
And Gabby, how did you move from accepting that this wasn't going to be bypassed from any spiritual healing
Yes.
psychology?
Yeah.
How did you make that shift?
I really like the word that you just used, which is acceptance, accepting. It really took about 4 months for me to fully accept that I had a diagnosis. I think that a lot of us, in my case, particularly in this field where I was teaching metaphysics and teaching meditation and had been brought up homeopathic and never had fulfilled a prescription in my life, I was very much wasn't even an option to me to consider that I could go get medicated support. And I didn't have any education around this type of condition. And it didn't happen quite in the first few weeks like it might for other people. So I think that that also was a little confusing because I was like, oh, well, what is this? Maybe I'm just anxious. But then I had insomnia and I had all these different qualities that were really affecting me big time. Ultimately, I think for me, it came to a place where I hit enough of a bottom that I finally accepted the help that I needed and had a therapist who had an intervention and sort of said, we got to fix this. We got to help. We got to get some real help here. And for me, that was the biggest relief. But I think also at the same time, we don't often give ourselves permissions at times to make those changes. And then once we do, we're all in, right? And so I think that was the biggest lesson for me, was just being in full acceptance that this was something more that there was no amount of self-help that would help me out of this. There was no amount of even talk therapy or spiritual practices or ashwagandha that was going to get me out of this situation. It was really something that needed a medicated path.
And it's only in really recent times that now we as women are beginning to honor and embrace our hormonal changes. But back then, when you were going through it, it was still, hidden in a shroud of some sort of privacy or something you don't talk about. So I'm so glad
Yeah.
women like you we're now talking about it. So, because that new mother is already inundated with so much pressure to
Yeah.
perform and to get her body back.
Yeah.
And so I can just imagine, you know, Gabby, you've really spoken loudly about rock bottom moments and how you have transformed and alchemized rock bottom moments. And as a therapist, I really use those moments, but people are resistant to rock bottom moments.
Mm,
And in your history, looking back, when I work with a client, their greatest onus is to avoid reaching rock bottom.
right.
But people like you and me who've been through it, alchemized it, and transformed ourselves know that there's a different potential there. Talk to us about this resistance to pain and how we can alchemize it.
Well, I've really taken this topic on headfirst with my new book and getting trained in internal family systems therapy, and also obviously using it in my own therapeutic processes with my therapist. So we spend our whole lives truly running from pushing down, overing, right? So drinking over, working over, loving over the impermissible childhood wounds from our past. And those wounds from trauma, whether it's big T trauma or small T trauma, it doesn't matter. It could be an experience of being bullied. It could be an experience of extreme trauma. It can have an extreme effect either way. And so when we have these experiences in our life where we have impermissible experiences of terror or attachment breach or feelings of being unlovable or inadequate as young children, we don't have the ability to process those experiences. And we oftentimes do not have the parental care that will help us process and actually move through those experiences gracefully and with ease. And so ultimately, what we do is we begin to protect ourselves from those feelings from a very young age. And in IFS therapy, these are called protector parts. And the protector parts are protecting against those exiled parts of us, those little children inside that experienced the feelings of being unlovable, inadequate, terrified, and just completely out of control. So from a very young age, we start protecting ourselves. So the little girl in me, the little girl who felt so out of control as a child, started controlling really young, would control everything, freaking out about her pigtails because that was her only thing she could control in those moments of feeling out of control. the little girl or little boy who feels like they're not being seen will do everything to be a perfectionist, to be seen, to show the world how great they can be, because that's all the way that they can protect themselves from the impermissible feeling of not being seen or being lovable. And so we have all of these habits and behaviors and belief systems, Shefali, that have been kind of running the show. And they're really young belief systems and young patterns and behaviors. And they're in IFS therapy known as protector parts.
Yeah. And it's so powerful what you said. And every parent needs to remember this because we get so caught up in our children's maladaptive behaviors, but we don't realize that is their desire to control against the impermissible pain of something deeper.
Yes.
My daughter right now is showing some behaviors, and I get triggered if I stay at the surface. But if I remember that this is the desire to control because of something out of control within, I can tap into empathy, I can tap into curiosity. But boy, it's hard because when the trigger comes at you, you want to, run amok with it. And the second thing I'll say is, I've helped so many parents, Gabby, in the moment to try to help children change the story. And I have found that actually they cannot change the story until first the impermissible parts get a voice. What has been your experience with that? Because we're so quick to go, we'll change the perspective.
Right. These little parts of us are just like our children. So the parts inside of us that are extreme or acting out are no different than our actual children having extreme moments of tantrums and acting out. And what do we want most in those moments as adults or as children? We want to feel connected. We want to feel compassion. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be soothed. We want a curiosity, truly. And the energy that we want is a parental energy. It's a sustained connection to a greater feeling of stability. And the thing that we longed for as children, we actually have inside of us to give to ourselves. And then the gift of that is when we can give that to ourselves. And this is what I'll teach today, which I'm so excited to teach to your audience because it's the ripest audience for this. When we actually start to access that inner parent inside of us, it begins to become more accessible in our parenting of our children.
So I love what you just said. You said that which we long for is within us.
It's within us. And what that is called self with a capital S. And self in IFS and internal family systems therapy is undamaged internal parent, the resourced adult self inside of us. It's the part of us that is compassionate. It's the part of us that is connected, the part of us that's curious, the part of us that is these C qualities, as Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, defines it. I'll start with actually this quote. There's a beautiful quote that I share in my book, Self-Help, that is a quote by Stephen Kranz, who is an IFS practitioner. And he said that self is like the sun behind the clouds. And it's always there, but the clouds are just blocking the sun. When the clouds begin to lift and begin to dissipate, the sun is revealed naturally. And that's what self is inside of us. Self is an energy. It's an energy of compassion. It's an energy of connection. It's an energy of curiosity and clarity and commitment. And it's an energy that we all have access to. And what we have to help, and self is also there to help these younger parts of us. And so through the experience of being a parent, if your child comes to you in your highest and best self, they're coming to you with a problem or they're seemingly distressed, intuitively you might turn to them with compassion and you might turn to them with curiosity. Well, tell me more about that. You might turn to them with a little bit of connection. You might want to establish a connection to them. And you're going to be very committed to them. This is a very intuitive nature that we have as parents, particularly when we're not triggered, right? So if we're in our resourced self, we can show up and we can be compassionate and calm and connected and curious and clear and courageous and confident. And then our child can reap those benefits. And that's when we're in our best, most resource self. The good news is that best resource self that we have for our children, we also have for our inner children, the family of all these inner children inside of us, the internal family. And the work here is to begin to bring that self energy to the little people inside of us so that we can help them regulate. We can help these burdened aspects of ourselves feel less burdened and feel more harmony inside. And as we do that, we become more grounded, we become more centered, we become more clear and confident and courageous. And then we become better leaders in our homes and in our businesses and in our lives. And we become more joyful and more childlike again because we can return to the natural state of who we are, which is that childlike nature that we lost. And so there's so much to be said here. I could go on and on. I'm so happy I could talk about it with you.
No, I love it. So that resourced big S self, is that born with us? Is that our inherent nature, but we've forgotten that? And then we create all these fears in response to our childhood?
Yeah, it's what you would call consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Buddha nature. It's the love within us. It's the God within us. It's the spirit within us. And there's many different words and forms for it. But we all know in any kind of spiritual faith that you don't have to go get to God. You have to just
Yeah.
release the blocks to the presence of that God within you. And that's what this process is. Very comparable to everything you teach.
We're going to take a break now, but coming up, Gabby's going to go deeper into what each one of us can do when we find ourselves in a crisis. Let's take a practical example. A parent comes to you and says, whenever I'm with my children, I'm super anxious because I'm just afraid that they're going to get kidnapped or they're going to get, extorted in some way or, used. And I just can't stop this overwhelming anxiety. I had a client just this morning talk about this unrelenting anxiety that she had every time she was with her children, and her thoughts would keep going to the future. So, for somebody just with basic generalized anxiety, where would you begin to do this self help and how would you guide them?
There's a chapter in the book called Anxious Parts. So,
Mhm.
an anxiety actually is a form of protection. Anxiety is a way that we would protect ourselves. So, it's projecting out something that we don't want to feel within.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would do is I would check in with the anxiety. And so my whole process that I've created is a self-help practice that is based on the principles of internal family systems therapy. And so it's a 4-step check-in process. And the first step is choose to check in with the anxiety. In this case, we're talking about anxiety. And so instead of checking out, instead of going to the refrigerator or becoming obsessed with the anxiety or micromanaging our children's lives, that would be a way of checking out because we don't want to feel that pain. We would check in with it. And so the first step is to choose to check inward, focusing your attention inward instead of outside. That's step 1. Step 2 is to become curious about that anxiety or whatever protection mechanism is up for you, but in this case, the anxiety. And so you'd ask yourself, well, where is that in my body? Where do I feel that? Where is it tight? Is it have a color? You would get a little bit more curious. How long has this feeling or this part of me been around? You might become even more curious and ask, what images or thoughts or feelings or sensations do you want me to know about? Just asking this part to reveal whatever it wants you to know. And then once you started to feel like you began to get some information about this part of you and you felt some connection, that's when you would bring in compassionate connection. And you would ask the part of you, what do you need?
Hmm.
And that part of you is young, that woman who has the anxiety for her children, that's her own young protector. And so she might hear, I need to feel safe, or I need to feel connected, or I need to rest, or I need to play, or I need to let go. And then once you acknowledge what it needs, the 4th step is to give it a little breath and check for the self energy. So you would check in and you'd say, do I feel a little bit more calm? Do I feel a little bit more connected? Do I have a little more clarity? Do I feel more confident, more creative, more compassionate towards
Oh,
myself?
yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's 4 steps is a truncated version of internal family systems therapy that, with the blessing of Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of IFS, I've been gifted the blessing of being able to turn this into a self-help book and take his incredible life-changing therapy and make it a self-help book that I am probably most excited to teach to parents, right?
Yeah.
Because 1, we all have these little children inside of us that are just screaming for our attention, begging for our attention. And 2, when we tend to those little children inside of us, it becomes our intuitive nature begins, the self energy, which is our intuitive, caring nature, begins to expand, become more accessible to us. And then in that access to self, we just have more of it for our children.
Yep. In my own parenting journey, I've had to really struggle with my own ego need to fix and to sit with the feelings that show up when I cannot fix and
Mm.
not jump into savior. I mean, it's just like it's 21 years and I'm still struggling with it. And I watch it and I turn inward and thank goodness for these tools. And I wish every parent, even just the pausing to turn inward to realize that we are now in a loop, is such a powerful step. Gabby, if you want to share, but what has been your hardest ego mask that you're trying to, or whatever word you want to use for it,
My part,
that
my protector part.
your protector part that you are seeing come up and with love and gentleness trying to, quieten down?
The biggest one that I've been working with for my whole life and has really been doing tremendous, incredible work with Shefali in the last several months is a part that believes if I don't do it, nobody else will.
Wow. If you don't do it, nobody else will.
No one else.
Wow.
Mhm.
And is that something you've had most of your life?
All as long as I can remember.
Wow. So in your parenting, in your couple, in your friendships, does it show up equally or is there some
It
area where
shows
it
up
shows
more in my work and than anywhere else.
this hyper kind of individualism, this hyper reliance on the self?
Reliance, frustration manifests in like not getting my needs met, right? Because if you walk around thinking, well, I'm the only one that can do it and nobody else is good enough to do it, or I'm never going to get my needs met, then you don't get your needs met. So it's a painful experience to be working in that way. But the good news is I've done a lot of self help on it and I've done a lot of therapy with it and I've brought so much recovery to it, which has been really life changing, truly. And so to experience that now and see the shifts of that now is such a gift to me.
I love your language. Just you brought recovery to it. I want everyone listening that when you have a part of you that's forbidden or you're feeling embarrassed or ashamed about, you can bring recovery to it. But what you're saying is that it's an unhealed part, right? It's a
That's right.
broken part. It's a sick, quote unquote, sick part that needs tending. It doesn't need more criticism, shame, and admonition.
That's exactly right. So in IFS, Dick Short says there's no bad parts. They're just parts of us that at a very young age were forced into these extreme roles to protect us, and oftentimes adult roles that they didn't want to be in. And so we've been in these roles of trying to protect ourselves since as long as we can remember. And these protection mechanisms, they deserve our attention and they deserve our connection. And in getting that connection and attention, what will happen is they start to settle and even if you start to experience sort of a molecule of relief from these parts of yourself, and then you go back and do a little bit more the next day and check in again the next day and check in again the next day, these parts of you will start to feel a greater trust in that self energy.
When you watch your son grow and remember, I'm sure, your growth as a child, what do you notice as remarkable differences of experience from your experience as a child to your son's, perhaps?
I'm a trauma survivor and I don't have any memories of my childhood. So I couldn't actually answer that question.
Mm.
Uh, what I the memories I do have are pretty imprinted memories of these parts, right? They're moments of terror, they're moments of extreme rage or they're pretty extreme moments. And for me, because I had that trauma, because I had parents who really weren't to help me in the ways that I needed it, God bless them, I did build up that protector part. If I don't do it, nobody else will.
Wow.
So all I know is that my child I can witness when parts are established in him. I saw a miracle today, though. Do you wanna hear a kid miracle? This was
Yes.
stunning. It was actually, like, the moment of, like, full belief and processing of something I watched because of my ability and his ability, but my ability to co-regulate with it or regulate with his energy,
Mhm.
him letting him regulate with me for as long as I have. So when my son was 3, I might have talked about this last time I was with you. He was in a Montessori program where there was 3 to 6-year-olds. There was a 6-year-old in the class that wanted nothing to do with the little kids, and my son at 3, just out of diapers, only wanted to be with these big kids, okay? So it was a bit of a mess. and this one kid in particular. And the kid was a bully, and he was not nice and was really detrimental to him. And so at 3 years old, he learned that, like, if I'm not the boss, if I'm not the big kid, then I don't belong. And he really struggled to make friends, like really struggled, not struggled to make friends, but he would show up and he'd be like wanting so much to be friends with people, but at the same time, like a little meanie, he'd have his like
Mhm.
his Nerf gun next to him, or he would, he'd be like, I'm bigger than you, I'm bigger than you. And it was like a lot of this for many years. Like if someone was younger, he would just like be so mean to them. And it was really just a projection of his own experience. And it was his way of course, protecting himself from that impermissible feeling as a little boy. And so we've been working with it for a long time, just sort of talking about it and never really trying my best in most moments, not shaming him or blaming him, and just sort of saying why, being curious, right? Offering that curiosity and that compassion and the connection around it. And he started a new school this year. And the first half of the year, he was struggling with just trying to make friends with these two boys who he was just really struggling. He just wanted to be with them. They were really close already. He just kept being like, I want to be friends with them, I want to be friends.
How old is he now?
He's 6 as of yesterday.
Okay.
There was this struggle with these new kids in the class. And today I went into the class and I spent the morning with them in the classroom. They do this Food Friday and I got to go. And Ollie was showing me around and he was giving me like the whole tour of the class. And after the full hour of running around and we put on a play. It was really cool. But at the end, I'm sitting with him and this other little boy. And this is the little boy that he'd been having some trouble with. And the little boy looks me in the eye and he goes, when Ollie and I first met, we weren't friends, but now we're friends. And his teacher, and Ollie looked at me and he's like, huge moment for Ollie. And his teacher looked at me and she goes, can I show you something? And she pulled me aside. And every week they make a self-portrait and they talk about what's great about them. And the third thing on his list was, I make friends easily.
Oh, right.
I
Yeah.
mean, so that is the processing that none of us had, right? Like not being, because most parents would be like shaming the kid for being a bully to the other little kids, right? But I
Mhm.
knew where it was coming from. I was
Mhm.
curious about it. I would of course remove him from situations when it
Mhm.
wasn't appropriate, but and was at times very confused and conflicted about how to handle it. But truly, I maintained that curiosity. I maintained the conversation around kindness and was mirroring a lot of kindness because I'm very
Mhm.
kind, and but mainly was just allowing the not shutting down that part of him that was trying to protect himself, but instead being curious and compassionate and connected to it. And in doing so, he was able to process it and then release that burden and make friends
Wow.
easily.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that he changed his own self narrative. And it's because you were not invested in him changing the self narrative.
Exactly. I was invested in him. I wasn't invested in forcing the change. Like, just no, that's not who we are. We don't do that. We're not this. Instead, being curious and compassionate, just like the 4 steps, right? Checking in with him, being curious. Why do you think you need to talk to the little kids like that, right? Being connected to him about it. What do you need in those moments, right? And oftentimes he'd say things like, I just need my toys not to be broken. I'm like,
All
oh,
right.
okay, that makes sense. Like,
All
I don't want
right.
that. No one wants that,
Right.
A lot of times we'll start pointing the finger, like, why would you do that? Why would you act like that? Instead of the why are you doing that, it's what do you need right now? What's going on inside of you?
Correct. Many times we ask why, and just because it's why, we think it's curious, but it's actually interrogative and it's judgmental. And what you're showing through that story, and I want every parent listening to feel reassured that allowing your children to have their life experience, whatever that looks like, is their right. And it's only our panic and our insecurity that curtails them from their experience, even if it's pain. Gabby, how do you deal with Ollie's pain and what does that bring up in you? And how do you soothe yourself in that moment?
I think that when I see him in those moments, few instances, like when this one kid that's now his friend was kind of being a bully to him on the playground, and I saw it, and I pulled Ollie aside, and I felt, of course, the pain, and the mother's like, "Don't teach my child like that." But I pulled him aside and I said, "We don't need to deal with this. Like, let's step away. Just like very frank. Like, we don't need to deal with. Like, we're going to walk away from this." And I just gave him the love that I knew he wanted, and so I said, "Let's play football. You and I can play football right now." So instead of instead of taking it on or overreacting or making him feel bad about the other kid doing what he's doing. Oh, he's doing his best or whatever. I just said, let's remove ourselves. I was mirroring what I would want in that moment.
Uh-huh. How is having a son, because I only have one daughter, is that a whole different experience given that you kind of understand the girl, the feminine? How is it with a boy, or do you not think about that at all?
I don't think about it much, but I really like having a boy.
Mhm. Why? Tell us.
Well, one, I don't know any other way, but I think as a child who experienced abuse and it was sexual in nature, I think that it's already triggering for me when I think about him, right? And I think if it were a girl, it might be really close to home for me. And even with him, I can see, I know that woman that was anxious all the time, something's going to happen to my child. I mean, I wonder, and I'd be curious what might have happened to her, right? And so, I mean, I don't want to put that, if she's listening, I don't want to put that on her in any way, but often we would project what we've experienced. And so I think that, not that these things don't happen to boys all the time, but mainly I think that there's less projection, I think. I see him as a strong presence, and I see him as an individual presence, and I'm not projecting my own story onto him.
Yeah. And many of us of the same gender do project. I have a daughter,
Be natural,
and
right?
oh, it's so much harder with the same gender.
Mhm.
However, I will say that sometimes parents having a child of the opposite gender may have father issues that show up, and but for people to just be aware of the projection. I was sexually molested too when I was a child, and I remember when my daughter was young, following her at parties, keeping how not to terrorize her, but how to also be aware because
Oh,
we have
yeah.
a worldview that is different than people who were not molested.
Yeah.
And that vigilance. And you're right, just having a girl is just a whole different vulnerability.
Yeah.
But your ability to project onto him that he's strong and he's capable can be done with any gender child. And when we
Oh,
project,
yeah, I wanna make sure that that's not just him being male, that I would say
right.
that. But I only thing I think about, if I had a girl, I might project my own vision of myself onto that.
Yeah, yeah. It's so hard when you have the same gender child. It's fascinating. But I think every child deserves for parents, if we're going to project the healthiest part of us, to project this abundance mentality. But sadly, because we're quote unquote with these protector parts that are still not healed and not yet listened to, validated, we project those parts onto our children. And just the other day, I was telling a parent, you have to just change the lenses. You're looking at your child as if it's you, what we went through. I know that in the area of sexuality, that fear could come up, but do you find that you sometimes trip up on that, like projecting onto him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think particularly around that wound, right? So, I remember one time I came out of a restaurant and my son and his friend were playing in the parking outside. They ran out and I ran after them. And there was a man talking to them, and sort of like I overheard him say, like, "Where do you guys live?" And I was like, "Oh, no way."
Right,
And I went in and I was like, "Don't ever tell anybody where you live. Don't ever give anybody
right.
information." Like, the guy walked away as soon as I walked over. And and it could have been a squirrely situation, but I remember my kid being so, it was very much projecting, right? It would be more valuable of a learning opportunity if I wasn't in so much fear and hypervigilance.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I remember so many moments. And for every parent listening, whenever we come at our children with this energy of don't ever think like
they
that.
think it's
Or
on like their fault.
oh
No.
my God. And they are just looking at us like, what did we do? But that's when you know you have a big unhealed part of you that is seeking this reassurance, this nurturing. So, in this book, Self Help,
Mhm.
what would you say would be daily practices? So, turning inward, being
So
curious.
here's the cool news. There's only one practice in the whole book,
Okay, good.
and that's the four-step check-in process. First and foremost, I think throughout the book, I'll help you understand who your protectors are, who's inside, who are you. And we're not going to those exiled parts, right? I want you to do that in your therapy, and you can do that with Shefali, you can do that with an IFS therapist. But the exiled, traumatized little children inside, that's not for you to do on your own as self-help. But in a self-help setting, you can work with these protection mechanisms that are sort of around all day long, managing your life. And what we can do is we can notice, okay, I've got beliefs that are holding me back, or I have patterns that I keep falling back into, or addictive processes, or I have destructive behaviors. And you've asked yourself, how long have these parts of me been around? They're gonna be like forever, for as long as I can remember. And you don't need to have that much information about them at all. You just need to know that they're there, know that it might be something that you find causing a little bit of struggle in your life, and you can check in with it. And so whenever you notice yourself in those stories of, for me, overly controlling or rageful, I'll check in. Like I woke up this morning at 4:30 in the morning to pee, and then I got hooked into the loop of some story that I was mad about, something that didn't go my way. And I was up from that point on. And what I did all morning for an hour and a half was I kept checking in with it. And so I would just focus my attention inward, which is step one. Choose to check in. And that's just focusing your attention inward instead of outside, right? Instead of like trying to overwork with it or drink over it or do something over it. And you'd focus your attention inward to the pattern of the behavior, the protection mechanism. And then you become curious, which is step two. And that's when you kind of get a notice where it is in your body and notice how it feels and notice if there's any thoughts or feelings or sensations that are attached to it. And you get that information. As soon as you feel a little connection to that part of you, you go to the third step, which is compassionate connection. And that's when you ask the part, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
And you listen. And then you witness and see if there's that self energy coming through you. And that self energy, if you feel a little bit more calm, or do you feel more connected? Do you feel clear about this part of you? Do you have a little bit of more confidence or courage? And you just check these C qualities. I'd guide you through it. And if you even have the slightest bit, feel the slightest bit more calm, or have a little bit of clarity about this part of you, or you feel a little bit more connected, then you know that you've done the 4 steps. You've created a new experience inside.
I love it because there's in no way is it trying to banish this part, diminish this part. And, in consciousness, we talk about how you just have to shine the light of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's in the light of awareness really cannot mutate, cannot catastrophize, cannot morph. It just stays in the light of awareness. And this gentle tuning in, providing yourself with some gentle, compassionate energy will naturally tame this throbbing, hungry, craving, yearning self.
Yeah.
Gabby, before we close, what is something you would now say to your younger self that you were longing to hear?
Oh, I would wrap my arms around her and I would say, you are so safe with me, sister.
Mm-hmm.
You're so safe with me, little Gabby. I love you so much. I'll be there for you no matter what you need.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's it, right? We all are searching for freaking safety.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be physically safe? Of course, that goes without saying. But really, can I be emotionally safe to show up as I am authentically and you don't judge me? You don't have to adore me, but can you just not judge me? Can you just accept that my reality is mine? And I think if we can just start there, we would make so much deeper progress with our children and ourselves. Gabby, biggest lesson from self-help, and then tell us where we can buy your book.
The biggest lesson from the book is that I'll quote Dick Schwartz, you are the one you've been waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
That what you are looking for is inside of you. And that often can sound like, oh, that sounds nice. But the great news is it's true. And when you follow these 4 steps, I have one prescription now. I'm like 4 steps, 1 minute a day.
Yeah.
I promise. And the subtitle of the book is This Is Your Chance to Change Your Life.
Yeah.
And I mean that
I
completely.
love how you've simplified it and created a practice that will build this muscle. We go to the gym, but we don't really have practices to tame these unbidden parts of ourselves. And your book is simple, it's always eloquent, and it's going to provide people this empowerment
Yeah.
that they can do this. They don't have to go to an expensive therapist. They can do this for themselves, and you're empowering them
Yeah.
to create the change within.
And the other thing is you don't have to tame them. You actually can befriend them.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. They can sit with you in the car seat. They just
That's
don't
right.
have to be in the driver's seat anymore.
That's right.
So tell us, when can we get this book and where?
It's New Year's Eve book. It's out. It's here. Happy New Year. Perfect book for the new year. It's the absolute book to help you create that genuine shift that you definitely want right in the beginning of the year. And like I said, if you just practice the 4 steps for 1 minute a day, you will experience radical change in your life. I can guarantee that. I can promise that.
I love it. And listen, Gabby is an author that knows how to speak to the heart, to the soul of what we're in pain about, and give us just these very easy, intentional steps forward. Gabby, what number book is this?
10.
10. It's going to be the best. Each one is the best. But I'm so excited for you. I'm so, admiring of your courage to put this out there. And I know it's going to be a huge success and transformative power in the world. So everyone get the book, Self-Help by Gabby Bernstein. She is a household name and you are going to love this book. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you. I love you. This was beautiful.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. And I will see you on the next episode of Parenting and You with me, Dr. Shefali. Parenting and You with Dr. Shefali is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical, psychological, psychotherapeutic, coaching, healthcare, or other qualified professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment.